The countdown echoed in the concrete bunker, each number a hammer blow against my eardrums. Outside, the September night was unnaturally still, a deceptive calm before the terror we were about to unleash. T-minus 30 seconds. The voice crackled through the headset, calm despite the magnitude of what was about to happen. I gripped the edge of the control console, my knuckles white against the cold metal. This was it. After years of development, preparation, and waiting, the first V-2 would soon be screaming toward London. My eyes darted across the instruments, checking each gauge for the third time. Pressure levels nominal. Fuel tanks full. Guidance system calibrated. Everything had to be perfect. One miscalculation, one technical failure, and the 12-ton rocket would either explode on the pad or veer wildly off course, potentially killing us all in the process. The ground beneath our feet trembled as the rocket engines roared to life. A deafening roar filled the launch bunker, shaking the very foundations of the concrete structure we stood in. Through the periscope, I watched the massive rocket rise on a pillar of fire and smoke, climbing steadily into the black sky. For a moment, it seemed to hang there, defying gravity, before accelerating into the upper atmosphere. Tracking confirmed, the officer at the radar console reported. Velocity nominal. Heading correct. I exhaled, the tension in my shoulders finally releasing slightly. The launch was successful. In less than 5 minutes, a ton of high explosives would detonate somewhere in London, a weapon against which there was no defense. No warning, no chance to take cover. Just the sudden, terrifying impact of a missile traveling faster than sound. Confirmed impact, came the final report. Target area, Chiswick. Casualties unknown. A grim satisfaction settled over the crew. We had done it. The world's first ballistic missile had just been used in combat, and I had been there to witness history. My name is Hans Friedrich, and I am an officer in the SS Artillery Battalion 500. This is my story of the V-2 rocket, the most terrifying weapon Germany fielded in World War II, a weapon that would change warfare forever. My journey to that launch bunker in the Netherlands began not on the battlefield, but in a classroom. I was always good at mathematics and physics, subjects that fascinated me with their precision and logic. When war broke out in 1939, I was a university student studying engineering at the Technical University of Berlin. Like many of my generation, I was swept up in the initial enthusiasm for the war, believing it would be short and decisive. In 1940, I was drafted into the Wehrmacht and assigned to an artillery unit. My technical aptitude quickly got me noticed, and I was transferred to a special weapons development unit in Kummersdorf, south of Berlin. There, I first encountered the V-2 program, then still in its early stages under the direction of General Walter Dornberger and Dr. Wernher von Braun. The V-2, or Vergeltungswaffe 2 Vengeance Weapon 2, was unlike anything I had ever seen. Standing over 14 meters tall, with a diameter of 1.65 meters, it was a marvel of engineering. Powered by a combination of ethanol and liquid oxygen, it could reach speeds of over 5,000 kilometers per hour, faster than the speed of sound, and deliver a 1-ton warhead to targets over 300 kilometers away. In 1942, I was transferred to Peenémünde, the secret research facility on the Baltic coast where the V-2 was being developed and tested. I worked in the Guidance Systems Division, helping to perfect the rocket's primitive gyroscopic controls. The work was intense, often requiring 16-hour days, but I was proud to be part of such an advanced project. I remember one particular test launch in June 1943. The rocket rose beautifully, reaching an altitude of over 100 kilometers before something went wrong with the guidance system. It began to tumble, then exploded at an altitude of about 20 kilometers, creating a spectacular fireball that lit up the night sky. Dr. Von Braun was furious, but he also understood that such failures were part of the development process. Every failure brings us closer to success, he told us, his face streaked with soot and determination. That same year, the British learned of our activities at Peenémünde and launched a bombing raid that devastated the facility. The damage was significant, but the core team survived and was relocated to a new underground facility in Nordhausen in the Harz Mountains. By this time, I had been promoted to Obersturmführer in the Waffen SS and assigned to the newly formed SS Artillery Battalion 500, which would be responsible for operational V-2 launches. The transition from development to deployment was challenging. The V-2 was a complex weapon that required extensive logistical support. Mobile launch platforms had to be designed, trained crews assembled, and supply lines established for the liquid oxygen and alcohol fuel. The fuel was particularly problematic. It had to be kept at extremely low temperatures and was highly volatile, making transport dangerous. In September 1944, after years of development and setbacks, the V-2 was finally ready for operational deployment. Our unit was moved to the Netherlands, where we established launch sites in forested areas to conceal them from Allied reconnaissance. The area around The Hague became our primary operating base, with launch sites camouflaged in the dense pine forests. The first launch against London was planned for early September 1944. By this time, the war had turned against Germany. The Allies had landed in Normandy in June and were advancing rapidly through France. Paris had been liberated in late August, and it seemed only a matter of time before the Allies reached Germany's borders. The V-2 was seen as a last hope, a weapon that might turn the tide of the war, or at least exact a heavy price from the Allies for their advance. As I stood in the launch bunker that September night, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of pride and apprehension. We were about to unleash a weapon unlike anything the world had ever seen, a weapon that could strike without warning from beyond the horizon. But I also knew that the V-2 was not a war-winning weapon. It was too few in number, too complex to produce in large quantities, and too inaccurate to be strategically decisive. Still, it was terrifying, and that terror was its primary effect. The first V-2 that night was followed by dozens more in the coming weeks. Our launch crews worked around the clock, sometimes launching 3 or 4 rockets per night. The process was grueling and dangerous. Each launch required hours of preparation, and the risk of accidents was constant. I saw 2 rockets explode in their pads, killing several crew members each time. The explosions were catastrophic, reducing the launch equipment to twisted wreckage and sending shrapnel hundreds of meters in all directions. Despite the dangers, morale among our crews remained high. We believed we were doing important work, striking back at the bombing campaign that had devastated German cities. The psychological impact of the V-2 was undeniable. Unlike conventional bombing, there was no warning, no sirens, no chance to take cover. The rockets arrived without warning, their explosive impact preceded only by the sonic boom that followed them. The first confirmed V-2 hit in London occurred at 6:43 p.m. on September 8, 1944, in the Chiswick district. The rocket killed 3 people and injured many more. Over the next few months, V-2s would kill nearly 9,000 civilians in London and injure another 20,000. The attacks caused widespread panic and disrupted life in the city, but they did not significantly impact the war effort. From a military perspective, the V-2 campaign was largely ineffective. The rockets were incredibly inaccurate, with a circular error probable of several kilometers. Many landed in open countryside or the Thames estuary, causing minimal damage. Those that did hit cities often struck residential areas rather than military targets. The V-2 also came too late in the war to have a significant impact on Allied operations. Despite these limitations, the V-2 remained a terrifying weapon. I remember reading a report from a British official who described the impact. The V-2 attack is different from any form of warfare hitherto experienced. There is no defense against it, no warning. It just comes. As the autumn of 1944 progressed, the Allies continued their advance. By November, they had reached the borders of Germany itself. Our launch sites in the Netherlands became increasingly vulnerable to air attack and sabotage. We had to constantly relocate, setting up new sites in forested areas and camouflaging them with pine branches and nets. The logistics of the V-2 campaign were a nightmare. Each rocket required a crew of about 50 men to prepare and launch. The fuel, liquid oxygen, and alcohol had to be transported in special tankers and kept at cryogenic temperatures. The guidance systems were delicate and prone to failure. The rockets themselves were assembled from components manufactured in underground factories by forced laborers, many of whom died in the harsh conditions. I visited one of these factories, Mittelwerk near Nordhausen, in November 1944. The conditions were horrific. Prisoners from the nearby concentration camp worked 12-hour shifts in the tunnels, malnourished and mistreated. Many died from exhaustion, disease, or execution. The contrast between the advanced technology we were developing and the brutal conditions under which it was produced was striking. I felt a sense of unease about the connection between our wonder weapon and the atrocities being committed in the factories. Despite these concerns, I continued my duties. The V-2 was my responsibility, and I was determined to ensure it was used effectively. We developed new techniques to improve accuracy, including launching salvos of rockets to increase the chances of hitting populated areas. We also experimented with different types of warheads, including high explosive and fragmentation, to maximize the psychological impact. By early 1945, the war was entering its final phase. The Allies had crossed the Rhine and were advancing into Germany proper. Our launch sites were being overrun one by one. We retreated eastward, setting up new sites in the Harz Mountains and eventually in Bavaria as the Allies closed in. The last V-2 launch I participated in occurred on March 27, 1945, from a site near the town of Bibergau in Bavaria. By this time, the end was inevitable. The rocket launched successfully, but its impact was meaningless, a mere footnote in the larger collapse of the Third Reich. As the war drew to a close, I found myself in American custody. The Americans were particularly interested in the V-2 program and the scientists who had developed it. Many of them, including Wernher von Braun, were brought to the United States to continue their work on rocket development, eventually contributing to the American space program. For my part, I was interrogated extensively about my role in the V-2 program. I provided detailed information about the launch procedures, technical specifications, and operational history. I was not charged with any war crimes, though I had been aware of the conditions in the factories where the V-2 components were produced. After the war, I struggled to come to terms with my role in the V-2 program. On one hand, I was proud of the technological achievement. The V-2 was indeed a revolutionary weapon, a precursor to the ballistic missiles that would define the Cold War. On the other hand, I was haunted by the knowledge that I had helped develop a weapon that killed thousands of civilians, many of them women and children. I often wondered about the people in London who heard the sonic boom and then the explosion, never knowing what had hit them. I thought about the families who lost loved ones in those attacks, with no warning and no chance to escape. The V-2 was terrifying precisely because it was so indiscriminate, so impossible to defend against. In the decades since the war, I have reflected on the moral implications of my work. The V-2 was a weapon of terror, not precision. Its primary purpose was to spread fear and demoralize the enemy, not to achieve specific military objectives. In that sense, it was a precursor to modern weapons of mass destruction, which rely on terror as much as physical destruction. Yet, I cannot deny the technological significance of the V-2. It was the world's first ballistic missile, a feat of engineering that pushed the boundaries of what was possible at the time. The scientists and engineers who worked on it were brilliant, dedicated individuals who genuinely believed they were creating something revolutionary. Perhaps the most troubling aspect of the V-2 program was the connection between advanced technology and moral bankruptcy. The same scientific expertise that created the V-2 also facilitated the atrocities of the Holocaust, particularly in the underground factories where the rockets were assembled. This connection between progress and inhumanity is a lesson that we ignore at our peril. Today, as I look back at my role in the V-2 program, I feel a mixture of pride and regret. I was part of something historic, something that changed the course of warfare. But I also contributed to a weapon that caused immense suffering and death. The V-2 was indeed the most terrifying German weapon of World War II, not just for its destructive power, but for what it represented, the terrifying potential of technology when divorced from ethical constraints. As the world continues to grapple with new weapons technologies, from drones to autonomous systems to cyber weapons, the legacy of the V-2 serves as a warning. Technology without morality is a danger to us all. The most terrifying weapons are not those that kill the most people, but those that make us forget our humanity. That is the true lesson of the V-2, a lesson we ignore at our peril.